The only message of change in Surah Al-Rahman is that's what brought Makkah to its knees, the Quraysh to their knees. This is what they could not tolerate. You get two extremes among Muslims today. You get Muslims that are obsessed with the rules, and they basically have and you find that they don't really live by principles. Like the technicalities of the beard, very, very well understood. The difference of opinion among the fuqaha on how long the beard should be, on how high the pants should be, and what kind of haircut is allowed, what kind of haircut is not allowed. They can discuss that to ends of the earth. The technical details. No regard for what? And you can see it. You can see there's no regard for the principles. And then there's the extreme opposite reaction. The extreme opposite reaction is Islam is just principles. These rules are useless. So long as you're following the principles, good job. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Quran to this world over a course of 23 years. And the majority of the surahs that were revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam were revealed to him in Makkah. So 2/3 of the Quran was given to him in Makkah. And the last 1/3 of the Quran was given to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina. Now, in Makkah, the message of Islam looked very different practically than the message of Islam in Medina. The message of Islam in Makkah did not have anything to do, for the most part, it did not have to do with details about how to slaughter an animal. It had nothing to do with performing Hajj. It had nothing to do with fasting in Ramadan. It had nothing to do with clothing guidelines. It had nothing to do with inheritance laws. So many of the things that you think when someone is Muslim and someone's Islamic and someone is observing their religion, none of those things were there for 13 years in Makkah. So if you were a Muslim or you accepted Islam in Makkah and then you died before Hijrah happened, and the only Islam you knew was the Islam of Makkah, then your Islam would look very different than the Islam that we see in front of us today. Another important thing, that Allah Azza wa Jal gave the message of the Quran unified by surahs. So Surah Al-Asr is a message. Surah Al-Fatiha is a message. Surah Al-Rahman is a message. These are all packaged messages from Allah. Allah calls them Risalati Rabbi, right? The Prophet ﷺ is told to say, these are messages of my master, right? And a message is a complete unit. It has a beginning, middle, and end, and it's one full concept, a full idea, right? Now, I want you to use your imagination, and I want you to analyze this with me. Let's take the example of, say, Surah Al-Rahman, and I recited some ayat of Surah Al-Rahman to you in the beginning. It's a longer, relatively longer Makki surah. It's not very small, and it deals with many subjects. It talks about the favors of Allah, it talks about Judgment Day, it talks about a description of Jahannam, it talks about the two different pairs of gardens in Jannah. So it's got many subjects. But if you ask practically, so Allah described people of Jahannam and Allah described people of Jannah. But in this message, Surah Al-Rahman, what does He want from people? If somebody only heard Surah Al-Rahman, that's the only Islam. It's very possible, by the way, if you lived in Makkah, that you didn't hear the whole Quran, you only heard some of it. Yeah? Like for example, the jinn only heard a little bit of Quran and then they reacted. That's in Surah Al-Ahqaf, also in Surah Al-Jinn, right? So if you only heard Surah Al-Rahman, then you would say, okay, some people are going to be in trouble on Judgment Day, and some people are going to be لِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ. Whoever was afraid that they're going to stand in front of their Rabb, there's going to be a trial. Whoever is afraid of that trial is going to get 2 gardens. That's the message of Surah Al-Rahman. But okay, fine, I'm afraid. What do you want me to do? What do you need me to do practically? What do I need to change? The only message of change in Surah Al-Rahman is أَلَّا تَطْغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ. Don't be corrupt when it comes to the scale. Don't be corrupt in the scale. وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ. Establish the scale with justice. وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانِ. And don't shortchange in the scale. What is simply, if somebody heard لَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانِ, you know what they would think? They would think, okay, if I sell rice and I'm going to put the weight on one side and rice on the other, if I just cheat just a little bit, give my customer maybe 5% less, nobody will notice, right? This is لا تخسروا الميزان. But mizan is a broader concept. I owe money to someone, that's part of mizan, I better pay it back. I did something wrong, I damaged somebody's property, I have to pay repairs, or I have to undo the damage. This is also part of mizan. There's a crime that's happened, justice has to be served. That's also mizan. Every court system in the world, they have a scale as their symbol, because mizan means justice, to balance things out. And to 100 different people listening to this, they have to think about where the mizan is messed up in their life, right? It's not everybody has the same problem. Not everybody has to weigh the same things. So everybody has to figure out their own mizan. But Allah did not give specific instructions about, when you are running a business, do this. And when you are in government, do this. And when you are a student, do this. And when you are an employee, do that. He didn't. He just said, لا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان. What was the Quran telling people 2/3 of the time? 13 years. And the people who followed that, you know what Allah called them? He called them السابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون. Those are the first people. They are the ones that are the closest to Allah. They're the closest ones to Allah. Now imagine, Allah is talking about men and women that are the closest to Allah, and they still, for the most of that time, they still don't fast in Ramadan. They've never gone to Hajj. They're not even thinking about Hajj. They haven't observed majority of the dietary laws. In fact, even alcohol is not haram for them yet. That's later. Even alcohol is not haram for them. And they're being called what? السابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون. What is so special about them? Nowadays, I live in America. There are people who live in Europe, other places where Muslims are a minority. When they see somebody praying, they go crazy. When they see a woman in hijab, they go crazy. They start getting offended. The problem is, in Mecca, what did you see that made you crazy? You didn't see a woman in hijab. You didn't see someone making salah in the street. You didn't see that. You didn't say, oh, I hate these people with a beard. Everybody had a beard in Mecca. You didn't see everybody, oh, this guy's wearing a turban and a thobe. Even Abu Jahl was wearing a turban and a thobe. They were dressed the same way. Oh, this guy's speaking Arabic. Everybody was speaking Arabic. Right? If one of you went back in a time machine, went back to Mecca, and you didn't know any Arabic, and you were sitting next to Abu Jahl, you think this is a sheikh. You wouldn't know, because he's dressed in Arab clothes and he's speaking beautiful Arabic. And my point is, we know that the Quraysh hated Islam, so much so that they were ready to kill the Prophet ﷺ. They were ready to torture the Sahaba. Over what? What was so revolutionary? What was so problematic? Mizan. It was a sense of justice. That's what brought Mecca to its knees, the Quraysh to their knees. This is what they could not tolerate. They couldn't tolerate it. Now the thing is, this is not a rule. It's basically a principle. And a principle means that if you're a doctor, the principle applies to you. If you're a son, the principle applies to you. If you're a father, the principle applies to you. Yeah? The principle applies to everyone. The thing about a hukm, a rule, like fasting, the fasting applies to someone who is healthy. Fasting applies to someone who is old enough. There are rules, right? Inheritance applies in one situation, does not apply in another situation. There are rules. Hajj is mandatory in some situations, is not mandatory in other situations. But principles are always applicable. There's not sometimes they're applicable, sometimes they're not applicable. They're always applicable. And you have, instead of looking for a fatwa, you and I, the human beings, not even believers, human beings were being told by the early Quran, you have the ability to figure out how to apply the principle of mizan in your life. I don't have to give you the details. You have aql. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ. They should think for themselves. Figure it out yourself. This was the early message of Islam. This was the foundation of Islam. Now, fast forward. We come to Medina. Allah starts revealing ahkam. Allah gave us the technicalities of wudu, for example. He gave us the technicalities of inheritance law. He gave us detailed instructions about divorce law. He gave us the rules for fighting in the path of Allah, the rules for zakat, the rules. Things became very specific. So specific that in the history of Islam, the most elaborate subject is fiqh. Why? Because it's a technical understanding of the rules. The madhahib, even more than al-madhahib al-arba'a, what are they? Just technical understanding, yeah? Which is very different from the principles. What I'm trying to tell you is those 13 years were not technical. But now things are becoming more and more technical. And of course, now you have to observe the rules because the rules have been revealed. So I'm going to fast forward. We're going to go to almost the end of the seerah of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he's giving Hajjatul Wada'. He's giving his final speech, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there are a few statements like فَلْيُبَلِّغِ الشَّاهِدَ الْغَائِبِ or بَلِّغُ عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. Yeah, the one who is here should tell someone who is not here. And he said, communicate even if it's one ayah. Communicate even if it's one ayah. Now let's think about that. There are some people on that day when he was giving that speech, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there were some people that have been learning Islam from him from the beginning. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is sitting there. Umar bin al-Khattab is there. Zubayr ibn al-Awwam is there. There are Sahaba that have been with him almost the whole time. Then there are the majority of the people. وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. Huge numbers of people. That I will call them the 99%. 99% of the people in that gathering are not trained for many years by the Prophet ﷺ. Some of them are Muslim for 1 week. Some of them are Muslim for 1 month. Some of them are Muslim for 24 hours. That's the majority. That's the majority of the crowd that is in front of the Prophet ﷺ in his last speech. The minority is the close Sahaba. The majority are basically new Muslims, fresh. What is he telling them? Go give, even if it's what? One ayah. How are they going to give? They're only Muslim for a week. They're only Muslim for 24 hours. They haven't been learning the Prophet ﷺ's teachings for so many years. And it's not a long speech, it's a very short speech. Right? There are different narrations of it. It's a short speech. And when that speech is over, they're all going to go. And this is the message that they heard. بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. You know what this is? This is the cycle starting again. Meaning those people will go and they will share very little of the Quran, but that little of the Quran will not have, it won't necessarily have the rules, but it will have the principles. Because there is no page of the Quran without principles. There are many pages of the Quran without rules. But there's no ayah of the Quran without principles. Principles will spread. Principles will spread because the principles are the foundation and the rules are the building that sits on top of that foundation. What did Allah tell us about Bani Israel? They became obsessed with the rules and they had no respect for the principles. No respect for the values. No respect for mizan. This was the foundational message. And then when those people learn the principles, then of course, eventually they will learn the rules and then they will apply the rules properly. What did, just like in construction, what's the more important thing? The building or the foundation? The foundation. Then you can't build a building if you don't build the foundation. And if you haven't been taking care of the foundation and the foundation keeps getting weaker and weaker and you keep doing a new paint job on the building and you keep adding new windows and adding new doors, the whole thing's going to collapse. You're going to keep, if the wall keeps having a crack and you fix it and it has a crack again and fix it has a crack, the problem isn't in the wall. The problem is in the foundation. Our deen was giving us a message about the importance of reinforcing the foundation with بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. That means there were Sahaba that were very mature. They understand all of the ahkam. They're like Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, right? There are Sahaba that can do tafsir of the Quran. There are those Sahaba. And then there are those Sahaba who are 1 month Muslim, baby Muslims, right? And each one of them has their own responsibility. The one that's starting out, they have a journey to take. The one that's ahead, they have a journey to take. But one thing they all have in common is the principles. That's actually what they have in common. The reason I think this is so important to share is because you get two extremes among Muslims today. You get Muslims that are obsessed with the rules, and they basically and you find that they don't really live by principles. but they live by the rules. Like the technicalities of the beard, very, very well understood. The difference of opinion among the fuqaha on how long the beard should be, on how high the pants should be, and what kind of haircut is allowed, what kind of haircut is not allowed, what did Imam Malik say, what Imam Shafi'i said, what Abu Hanifa said, rahimahullah, etc., etc. They can discuss that to ends of the earth. The technical details. No regard for what? And you can see it. You can see there's no regard for the principles. And then there's the extreme opposite reaction. The extreme opposite reaction is Islam is just principles. These rules are useless. So long as you're following the principles, good job, right? The rules are, these people, they're so obsessed with the rules. Look at them. They don't follow any principles. So what happens is the people of principles say, we don't need the rules. And the people of rules say, we don't need the principles. The Quran gave us the principles and on top of them built the rules. It's not enough to build a foundation. What's the point of a foundation if you don't have a building? You have to have the rules, but you can't have the rules without the foundation. This is a whole picture. So when someone hears me talk about this, immediately, the mind is much more intelligent than the comment section in a social media post. If this was a social media post, immediately, are you saying Sharia is not important? Are you saying we don't have to follow the rules? Liberal, right? Progressive. This is the mind. Why? Because you have to be on this team or you have to be on that team. And you know what gets ignored when we do that? Quran gets ignored. The Quran itself gets ignored. There are some people who are starting their journey. Right now, they don't need the rules. Right now, they need the principles. There are people that are already very familiar with the rules. They're very familiar. Even they need a reinforcement of bringing back the principles onto the rules. Because you can end up just with rules and no principles behind them, no life behind them, right? This is an extremely important discussion also for the next generation. There are lots of youth that say, I don't know, Islam, I don't know about these rules, man. Everything's haram. And these guys make life difficult. Everything's just, rules, rules, rules. My problem with Islam is the rules. Why do they have these rules for women? Why do they have these rules for, zakat? Why do you have these rules for prayer? Why do you have to have these rules for food? Why do you have these rules for alcohol, etc., etc.? I don't like these rules. I want to be free. You know what? Good. You should have a problem with the rules. You should. Because even Aisha radiallahu anha, ta'ala anha said, لو أول ما نزل من القرآن لا تشربوا الخمر. If she said if the first thing that came in the Quran was don't drink alcohol, لقلنا والله لن نترك الخمر أبدا. We would have said, wallahi, we will never leave alcohol. Don't give me the rules first, because the rules are not convincing. You know what's convincing? The principles are convincing. When you are convinced of the principles, then nobody has to convince you of the rules. No one has to convince you of the rules. The conversation about Islam with those who are loose in their Islam, those who are not sure about their Islam, those who are walking away from Islam, the conversation with them doesn't need to be about the rules. The conversation with them needs to be about the principles. And you know what? Every time you talk to them about the principles and it touches them, they say, oh, what about the rules? I don't like that rule. Let's talk about the rule instead. Because they get, when a person gets cornered, then they find a way to escape the conversation. بَلِ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرَةٌ وَلَوْ أَلْقَى مَعَاذِيرَهُ. But any one of you, especially the youth that are engaged in da'wah, you know friends that talk about the rules. You know friends that say this rule doesn't make sense, that doesn't. And you fall into that conversation and start defending the rule this way or that way or the other way. The hikmah of the rules will be understood by those who respect the rules. If you don't respect the rules, doesn't matter how much you explain the logic of them and the explanation of them, and it won't make a difference, because you're trying to build this building with no foundation. This is why the early Quran has to be understood first properly. How do you communicate the principles of this religion? How do you communicate them? And once we are effectively able to do that, I am telling you, even if the people are, they know very little about the rules, they are on a journey of obeying Allah that Allah wanted for them. Rasulullah ﷺ in his last speech did not give them a detailed explanation of the rules. He gave them some fundamental principles. because that's the starting point. We have to come back to the starting point. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us a generation that helps our fellow brothers and sisters and even non-Muslims come back to that foundation on which this beautiful religion is built. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Hakim wa nafa'ani wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim.
Almost 300,000 souls have already been gifted a Bayan TV sponsorship, and the impact has been immense. But over 50,000 eager students who can't afford it are still waiting to begin their journey. You can help. Visit bayana.com/gift to share the gift of the Quran so that another soul can explore the depths of Allah's words.
Their access lasts a year, but its impact may last a lifetime. I want you to help me help them and give the gift of Bayina TV today.